This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello and welcome to the DreamPod by Dreamcast Junkyard. You're joining myself, Andrew, your host, as well as my co-hosts joining me today, who are Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how's it going, Andrew?
Good, thank you. You?
Hanging in there. I'm doing good. This is the first low-key day I've had for a while, so
nice.
Looking forward to relaxing as well.
Good. We're also joined by Lewis. Hello, Lewis.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And we're also joined by Mike. Hi, Mike. Afternoon. So yes, we are back with another DreamPod, and we've got a nice themed one for you today, which is all about games that embody the Dreamcast spirit. So games that are not on the Dreamcast, but they embody that spirit that the Dreamcast has become known for. And of course, we always start these podcasts off with a question of some sort. Usually it's what you've been playing. I might ask that question again at some point in the future, but I rarely tend to. And I do have a different question for us today. I've not told anybody what this question is, so I'm putting everybody on the spot. So get your thinking caps on, because this might be a thinker. Our theme is games that embody the Dreamcast spirit, but those are games that are not on the Dreamcast. Which specific Dreamcast game do you think embodies the overall spirit of the Dreamcast? And I'm going to put Lewis on the spot and come to him first.
Oh, that's a good question. Christ, you put me on the spot. I'm like trying to turn around to see what games are on my shelf, but like that means I wouldn't be facing my mic. So,
that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we have to. Do we have to define the spirit of the Dreamcast first? Would that help? I mean,
it may be different for everybody, right?
Yeah, it's true, I suppose. Yeah. But there's a few things, right? I mean, it's online gaming because it's the first console that really did that. It's the blue sky Sega aesthetic. It's the clean, crisp graphics that it had compared to what came before. It's the creativity that Sega managed to pull off in those years. And I guess that maybe those four things, for me anyway, those would embody the spirit of the Dreamcast. I don't know if anybody else has anything different or disagree with that.
I agree, I think. But for me, the game which embodies the spirit would be a game which has incredible potential, really sort of something different, has some really great ideas, but ultimately was an abysmal failure. So Spirit of Speed 1937 is my choice for the game that embodies the Dreamcast.
Interesting. A game that was not developed solely for the Dreamcast but ported to it.
Yes.
What's your...
Pretty much.
How would you...
Pretty much.
Yeah. How would you justify that?
I don't have to justify it, Andrew.
I mean, I'm asking you to.
you can ask me, but I haven't got to. No, obviously it's not. I said that to get some kudos from James. No, for me, Crazy Taxi. It has everything which Dreamcast sort of tried to do. It was a really eye-opening game. It was something which brought the arcade back into the home in a way which still really hadn't been done for that kind of game anyway. Blue sky, Sega aesthetics. I think I sort of would put it in sort of a wrestling context, that the Dreamcast is very much sort of the Attitude Era of consoles. It has that sort of extreme sports Attitude Era. And Crazy Taxi, I think, with the iconic soundtrack, I think it embodies it better than any other game.
That's fair enough. I think that's a good one. Lewis, with a bit more time to think, have you got one in mind at all?
I'm going to ask you to defer to Brian because I don't want to pick something he may pick. So I just want to check what he says first.
All right.
I'm of two minds of this, and I would definitely focus on that fourth point you made of the creativity aspect. And certainly I think Crazy Taxi embodies that. And I mean, the whole idea of Sega in that era, and really their R&D and dev studios were firing on all cylinders just to really figure out what else they could do to bring new experiences and concepts to life, right? And so they were really inventive in things like Seaman and Crazy Taxi and all these games that were you kind of just undermined like the traditional verbs that we had been used to doing. So it's like, oh yeah, every game up until, not every game, but like so many games up until that point were either locked into a certain genre of platformers or shooting or fighting. Like everything revolved around a limited set of violent or collecting related verbs. And I think Sega's studios at the time were just like, well, what else can we do? How about we let people talk to fish, right? How about we let people, we let people use maracas as a way to play a music game. So I think there, you could pick any one of those games in that mold to kind of embody that. But I'm also of the mind that there were a lot of just kind of easy PC ports that came out at that time that were like this sort of muted, not shallow, but like, there was kind of sterile, right? There was like a sterile, vague, futuristic vibe that like, and so if I'm taking the average of all of those, I might say something like Slave Zero embodies that aspect. And so if I'm combining a Slave Zero and a Crazy Taxi to find like what's the average of those two tracks, it's probably Blue Stinger for me. And that's also my favorite. That's also my favorite Dreamcast game, and it only exists on Dreamcast, so other than emulation. So
very true.
There's that as well. But yeah, so Blue Stinger. That's a long way of saying Blue Stinger through a bunch of non sequiturs.
I can see that, though. I can see that. I'm sure not everybody will agree because it can be a divisive game, but no, I get
so
that.
is the Dreamcast, right? Like, I think it makes sense. It was an underappreciated console, and Blue Stinger was an underappreciated game.
True. Very true.
Yeah.
Okay. Lewis, does that help you at all? Was that what you were going to say?
I was maybe going to think Brian might say Shenmue, but I don't think I'm going to say Shenmue, although that probably is like the most... That I feel like Shenmue answers your question like perfectly.
Yeah.
But I think my choice would be Power Stone 2. I mean, it embodies the blue skies and everything. It's a very colourful, action-packed game. There's literally a level called Blue Sky Area. And another thing is that it was a co-op game, which is one of the points I think, Andrew, maybe missed out there, is that the Dreamcast was of that era where people were doing like couch co-op and there's sort of a party element to it. But the biggest reason is that I feel this game is a bit of an underdog, and that's because it is a sequel to a beloved game in the first Power Stone, and the first Power Stone in a sense is quite traditional in what it does. Compared to the second one, Power Stone 2 just throws everything out the window, and you've got these like moving arenas and crazy weapons and all this, and I think that it doesn't always get the love it deserves because a lot of people obviously compare it to its predecessor, and it's just like the Dreamcast in the sense that the Saturn and the Dreamcast will always live in the shadow of the Mega Drive or the Genesis. So yeah, it's kind of got that for it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have maybe gone for Shenmue as well. And back to Brian's point about kind of things being in very specific genres. Well, Shenmue kind of created its own, right, with the full reactive eyes entertainment, which really is just not a genre. That is just a bunch of words. But it did popularize the open world and things like that, and it fused different genres together to create something all of its own. But saying that, I think there's something that probably deserves it more, and kind of going back to what I was saying about these different aspects of what makes the Dreamcast. The one thing that we haven't touched upon in the games that we've looked at really so far is the online aspect. So I would probably pick Phantasy Star Online because I think that does still have those Sega aesthetics, the blue sky aesthetics. You go down onto, is it Ragol? What's the name of the planet?
I think that's it, yeah.
Ragol, I believe. So you go down to the surface of the planet, you've got those beautiful blue skies when you first go down there. You've got, the beautiful trees, the flora, the fauna, the monsters. But then you've also got this this thing that the Dreamcast was famous for, still is famous for, is that this online aspect. And it's the first game that really used that to its true potential and really kind of started this whole console online RPG thing going. So it was very innovative, and it did something completely new that only Sega at this point in time would probably have come up with. So yeah, I think Phantasy Star Online is probably one of the games that probably best describes the Dreamcast in a game. But I think every game that we've mentioned here probably does that, and I think there are more besides. I mean, you could probably mention Jet Set Radio, you could probably mention Res, all of these things, and you'd probably go, yeah, that's Dreamcast, yeah, that kind of is like the soul of the Dreamcast distilled into game form. But I think that's probably down to the fact that, like we were saying, so many of these games took these creative risks that you look at them now and you go, well, yeah, only the Dreamcast could have done that. Because if you went to the PlayStation 2, it would have been a shooter, or it would have been a bog standard platform or something. There wouldn't have been, a game where you run Sega and have to fight RPG battles with consoles and stuff. It just wouldn't have happened. So, yeah, I think, I reckon all of the games we mentioned definitely do that, and I think they do those in different ways, which is great.
There's so many. I mean, you could also make an argument, I think, for Sonic Adventure. Just because it was, at least for me, and maybe people who were getting into it early, it was just a catalyst for like, oh crap, this is the thing. This is the game that is showing me that Sega's new console is really pushing things forward in ways that I didn't think that would be possible on previous hardware. So it was a pretty ambitious game, and it kind of, and for better or worse in all the ways it succeeded and failed and throwing stuff at the wall. It was a game of just a million ideas, right? And all of the different mini games and all the different play styles and intertwining level types and narratives. And so it's like, yeah, there's a lot there that kind of embodies the approach Sega took to the Dreamcast. So I don't know, maybe that's another one.
One of the first games possibly to, like, console games to have DLC as well. Like, as far as I'm aware, like, hopefully someone can come along and correct me, but like, it's when you look up stuff like DLC, like, I feel like Sonic was one of the first ones that are notable, to download those like themes and stuff. So even that sort of lesser known part of it is like pretty revolutionary as well, and probably not that like incredible really. It's like, you just, it makes Sonic's level like a bit spooky, but at the time it was cool. So, but now we just look back at it like, oh, that was a thing. But, Dreamcast did it,
Yeah, I think that got people overlook that because the most famous example of early DLC is the horse armor for Oblivion. Which you had to pay for, and obviously I think the Sonic stuff was not paid. You could just download it for free, which is great. But yeah, downloadable content took a really crappy turn after the Dreamcast introduced it to, as it were. So yeah, definitely awesome. Well, I think we got some good answers there. What would be good as well, if anybody listening, if you have a different idea of an answer to this question, just drop it into the comments of the Twitter post. We'll undoubtedly put a Twitter post out about this. So just let us know what you think the game is on the Dreamcast that embodies the spirit of the Dreamcast, and have a lovely, nice discussion. Let's not go weird. Let's have a discussion about which game perhaps was the most Dreamcast. That's how I'd word it. But moving on from the most Dreamcast game, we're moving on to the game that was not on the Dreamcast but is still the most Dreamcast. I'm just making no sense now. I'll reread the name of the episode. We're looking at games that embody the spirit of the Dreamcast, that Dreamcast spirit that we all know and love, the reason that we're still sticking around with the console after all these years. What games do we think embody that spirit today. So games that are on either modern systems or systems that came after the Dreamcast at some point. It doesn't have to be ones that are bang up to date. It could be ones from a few years ago. It could be ones from consoles that came out right after the Dreamcast. So we're going to look at a few examples of that and discuss those.
Could they have come out before the Dreamcast?
No.
You could argue that, like, I don't know, Parappa the Rappa or something has some Dreamcast energy.
That's true, actually. Yeah, okay. Maybe I'm being too limited in my scope, but yeah.
There's a game on PS1 that I recommend people check out because it has an English fan translation called Mazurna Falls, and it's like, if you watch it, it's like Shenmue on PS1, and it's like baffling that it never got localized. Like, it's quite an impressive looking game. I recommend people check that one out.
Nice.
But, that's kind of a Shenmue before Shenmue almost.
I have to give that a look.
Yep.
Very interesting. I don't think any of the games that we're talking about today are before Dreamcast, but that is a good point, Brian. There are those things, but I guess if they came before Dreamcast, then potentially they would have influenced the Dreamcast games in some way, the Dreamcast spirit in some way, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and also, just thinking about how everything is kind of a collaborative iteration, right? All of those developers kind of learned from each other. So some of the stuff Sega was doing probably in the 80s and early 90s was informing other works that in turn inform probably what Sega would do later.
Very true. That's very true.
Kind of a Beatles, Rolling Stones dynamic, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we'll dive into some of these games then that we want to talk about. I'm going to go first for a change. Usually it will come to me last, but I'm at the top of Lewis's list that he's done for our running order, so I'm just going to go with that list, and we'll start with me. So the first game that I wanted to bring up, which kind of embodies the spirit of the Dreamcast to me, and also in a way it's a developer who worked on the Dreamcast, so it would probably be no surprise that it still embodies some of that spirit, and that would be Blur, which I think came out for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Mm-hmm. So that was I think one of, if not the last game that Bizarre Creations made. I think they may have made like a James Bond game after that, but Blur was one of the last games they made. And it's a racing game in very much the same style as Metropolis Street Racer and then Project Gotham Racing that came after. But it does something different, and it does something that I think that if they'd have thought of this back in the time of the Dreamcast, I think it would have fit so well on the Dreamcast, which is that they looked at things like Mario Kart and they went, well, what if we do real life cars, but we give them weapons so you can actually, and power-ups and stuff so that you can do that Mario Kart-like experience, but you're in, it's based on real life with real driving mechanics and physics and real cars and real locations. And I feel like that's something they probably would have done on the Dreamcast because it's just such a good idea. It's taking that thing that they're known so well for, which is their fantastic racing games, and their attention to detail for both the cars and for the locations that they have, but then mixing in something incredibly fun and different with these power-ups and weapons. So it makes the racing, it's not just your typical, racing for first place, or in the case of MSR and later things like PGR, kind of racing for kudos, for style points, for doing things like drifting and all that kind of stuff. They went one step beyond that, and the fun then becomes, how can I best my opponent? How can I knock them off the road? How can I use my power-ups most effectively to overtake them and win? So it was an incredibly fun single player game, but it was also amazing in multiplayer. And again, something that would have worked so well online with the Dreamcast. So you can just feel the spirit of the Dreamcast kind of almost dripping from that game. And it was very, very sad that then they kind of closed down shortly after. Never got to make Blur 2, although there are trailers online that show kind of early ideas of what they wanted Blur 2 to look like, because they were going to develop that game. And yeah, I just think it's an absolutely, it's just an incredible game. It's a game that I like to go back to every so often, and it features Brighton, which is the town that I now live in. So it's kind of interesting being able to drive down the seafront of a place that I know quite well. So yeah, It's very cool.
Yeah, Brighton looks quite cool at night time. Is it at night time in the level?
It is, yeah.
That's cool.
It's changed a lot since Blur, and Brighton's changed a fair bit, but yeah, you still get the idea of it, and I think it's just so well done. But all the levels in that are well done. I think they're just really good. They've chosen some really good locations, and they've done some really good street courses. So yeah, I really love that game. Even my partner, who is not a racing game fan at all and would not touch Mario Kart with a barge pole because it's Nintendo and he thinks that's for kids, he absolutely loved Blur. He's like, this is brilliant. So he got that, he was able to then to play something Mario Kart-like, but in a form that appealed more to him. So they really did something special with that, I think. Has anybody else played Blur at all?
Yeah, I have. What year did it come out? 2009? 2010?
It's probably around then, yeah, I think so.
I think I made a mistake at the time. I think I bought it and Split Second at the same time. And whilst I enjoyed Blur, Split Second was, what an underappreciated gem that was. Mm-hmm. Another game which probably could have fit the Dreamcast theme as well. But yeah, Blur was alright. It was very different than Project Gotham Racing. But I can definitely see why it links into the sort of aesthetics of a Dreamcast and the sort of the feeling that the Dreamcast would elicit in people. That's a good choice.
Nice. Brian, Lewis, have you ever played this or seen it? Or
Well, I am aware of it. I've not played it myself. I don't know about Brian. Have you?
No, I picked it up a while back when I was on a kick. I had just gotten a PS2, PS3 racing wheel, and so nice. It's in the queue for when I'm back into that streak of trying to play racing games. But no, I haven't actually played it yet.
Well, if you've got it, you should definitely try it at some point. I think it's well worth everybody's time to at least give it a go, and it's probably incredibly cheap now. If you were to go to a second-hand store, you could probably pick it up for pretty cheap. So I would encourage everybody to give it a go. And I think considering its bizarre creations, if anybody is a big fan of Metropolis Street Racer from the Dreamcast, I think they owe it to Bizarre Creations to try what they did later. And they steered quite, pun intended, they steered quite far away from racing games after Project Gotham, because I think that they'd had enough of it and they went into quite very different games for a while. But Blur was them kind of coming back to what they knew, and I think it was but learning from what they'd done since, and I think that made it all the better. I think that made it a much more interesting title. So yeah, if you like Metropolis Street Racer, I would give Blur a go. All right, I'm going to move on to Brian now. And Brian, do you want to talk us through your first pick?
Yeah, and I'll probably preface it that it's probably one of many games I could pick here, and kind of the catch-all cop-out answer is that if when I'm looking at my Steam collection, or just like collection of all the indie games that I've played over the last few years, I feel like the Dreamcast spirit is alive and well all around in that space. Thinking about games like Rollerdrome, which kind of draws from Jet Set Radio, Tony Hawk, but also like shooter, kind of arena shooter elements, Hard Space Shipbreaker, Outer Wilds, Untitled Goose Game, those kinds of stuff, where those kinds of games, as we were talking earlier, like that were really pushing new concepts of like what other things can we build a game around that's different than anything that had come before, or is an amalgamation or a twist on concepts that take them in a new direction. So honestly, I think the whole world, the whole indie world at least, is full of Dreamcast spirit. But one game I'd been playing recently that really kind of embodies that a little more is Umurangi Generation. And so this is kind of a slower paced game, and it's not a very long one. It's kind of just like a tightly designed game where you're exploring all of these sort of cyberpunky, pseudo futuristic spaces. It's almost like a dilapidated I don't know, dystopia future, but also rooted in like kind of a 90s aesthetic as well. And you just take pictures. The whole game is that you're in this dense space with a bunch of stuff in it, and you're tasked with taking pictures of random objects in that space or people in that space, and you have to explore it to get the right perspective and be able to frame things in a way that you can get the shots of specifically what it's telling you to do. So it's like a certain number of solar panels or 2 boom boxes, or that kind of thing. You have to kind of get clever to try to, and then you get different lenses as you go to help make some of those objectives easier to be able to fit more things in the frame, or get close-ups with a telephoto lens or something. And so it's really just, I don't know, it leans into that like early 3D aesthetic as well. It vaguely looks like a Dreamcast game, or maybe like a high-res PlayStation game ported to the Dreamcast almost. And yeah, and then also the soundtrack is really good. It's one of those games that's like, maybe it would be a lesser game if it didn't have such a chill soundtrack to go with it. And it's this kind of like, I don't know, a lot of, maybe not drum and bass, but it's actually fairly eclectic. It's just a relatively chill electronica soundtrack that spans a variety of styles. I think it was composed by, he has a YouTube channel, Thor High Heels. Yeah, that guy. And it's fantastic, and actually really sets the vibe of the game. But the game itself, I enjoy it, but it reminds me almost of Jet Set Radio, even though it is completely different in terms of the pacing and cadence, and because Jet Set Radio is a more action-focused game. But they both give me a same feeling of sort of like they impart like an irksome feeling when I try to play them. Like the controls are just a little bit wonky. Like there's a little bit of a disconnect between what I'm trying to do in the space and what it allows me to do. But at the same time, it gives me a level of verticality or ways to try to get around and explore to get to new areas where I can get specific shots in a similar way that I would try to explore and get to new areas to tag targets in, or tag specific icons in Jet Set Radio. But of course the aesthetics and soundtrack, or at least the idea of the degree to which those two games lean into their presentation to make them what they are. I just feel like it really gives me those vibes of a Jet Set Radio without actually like mimicking the gameplay.
I think the DLC had you on rollerblades, didn't it, as well?
Oh shoot, I haven't played the DLC yet.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I remember seeing like a clip, because obviously I heard about the game because it was like this, it's kind of got this Jet Set Radio sort of cell shaded, like you were saying, a sort of cyberpunk sort of vibey aesthetic. And then obviously I saw that there was a DLC with rollerblades. I was like, oh, okay, it's all coming together now. I think you just use them to sort of like get to your next photo a bit quicker. I think there might be some kind of like wall riding elements to it, but I don't think it's like too extreme.
Overall, just kind of plays into the list of other games I was talking about, where it's just games that try to push inventive concepts and pioneer a certain experience it's trying to do that's different than what we would expect from set genres or other traditional games. And I think that is the core of what the Sega Dreamcast era spirit means to me.
I haven't heard much about this game. I have heard of it, but I can never place it and really know what it is. But you kind of intrigued me now to want to go and give that a go. Is it one that's kind of locked to the PC, or is it one that's on console,
No, I think I was playing it on Xbox, but I'm sure it's on Switch.
It's
on PS5. It's on everything, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I've got it on the Switch. I haven't played too much of it. I think it was just like at the time I had other things I was probably playing, and I saw this was on the Switch and got it. Started playing it a bit. I think Brian's right. The controls are slightly stiff. I don't know. It feels sort of PS1 like you're in a 3D space, but it's kind of stiff. But to be honest, like I think it embodies the Dreamcast spirit in the sense that, like, other than the sort of similarities to that sort of Jet Set Radio, like, cool aesthetic, sort of Neo Tokyo kind of vibe. I think it's just like the vibe of it. It's just chill, you know, like Brian was saying, you walk around and you take photos of things. And I think it's quite clever in the sense that it like tells a little bit of a story of what's happening. Mm-hmm. So there's like areas where you have kind of a military presence. What's gone on here? Like what's happened to this world? But you're part of a crew of younger people. They're hanging out and there's this more sort of serious thing kind of going on in the background, but it's sort of an undertone, at least in the bits that I played. But yeah, like I think the vibes is the biggest word I used to describe this, like, and just the sort of Dreamcastiness of it in the sense that I feel like Mike touched on this previously in another podcast, is that like we kind of sometimes get a little bit too focused on what we consider a game, and so we look at a game where you walk around and you take photos as like, oh, that's a boring idea. But just like in Shenmue, when you're walking around and, you know, it seems like quite slow paced, you know, you're just kind of taking it all in and you're enjoying the world and you're taking the photos, and it's just like it makes you feel good as you play it. And I think that's a very Dreamcasty thing. Just the vibe of it in general. And like, speaking of the composer Thor High Heels, his channel is all about vibes with a Z. A lot of his reviews aren't necessarily even about like the gameplay. He's talking about how it makes him feel, you know, how the atmosphere is. So yeah, definitely in spades in this game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole other discussion there. You could talk about, like, you know, maybe the way we've been classifying genres is a little too limited or misguided, when really what we're trying to figure out, or what are the core set of reasons we play these things, or like the vibes there. Yeah, use that word. Or, you know, what's the emotion that's being drawn out to, you know, in our connection with these games. And sometimes that, you know, can transcend whatever the verbs are. It's like, yeah, I could get that maybe from a racing game, or from a shooter, or from a adventure game, or, you know, visual novel. Like there's a lot there that's kind of exploring that commonality in a different way, where there's games I want to play to relax, or games I want to play because I want to work towards a bigger goal, or you know, do the kind of score attack thing to like be able to keep improving over time through repetition. It's like, yeah, those are the reasons. Like when I'm thinking about what do I want to play, it's really based around what are those emotions or those types of things, rather than what specifically do I want to be doing verb wise.
Nice. Cool. That's a good choice. I'm definitely going to have to go and check that out after the podcast now, see what that's all about. Lewis, coming to you next. You have a slightly older game to talk about in terms of its Dreamcast spirit, right?
Yes. This is one that I think, at a surface level, I think people may hear this and be like, what? What's he on about? Grab the pitchforks. Because this one's by Rockstar, who, when it comes to Shenmue, I think people see, you know, Grand Theft Auto 3 and this series that obviously went on to be massive, and almost like what people consider the pinnacle of an open world game. You know, a lot of fans like who play the Dreamcast, who play Shenmue, see that, and they kind of say, well, Shenmue influenced this. Shenmue is groundbreaking in that sense. But I actually think that this game that I'm going to speak about today, which is called Bully, or as it was called in the UK, Canis Canem Edit, is a little bit more Shenmue than Grand Theft Auto is, actually. I think because of like the game's sort of fairly, I suppose, juvenile exterior, and like it's a bit, you know, more humorous than Shenmue, because Shenmue is obviously quite a serious game. I think people would be quick to sort of say, like, why are you comparing this to Shenmue? But actually, like, I think if you play Bully, I think there's a lot of elements of Shenmue in it, and I feel that probably the developers had played Shenmue. So, like, for example, so like in the game, you play as a 15-year-old delinquent who I think looks a bit like Wayne Rooney, called Jimmy Hopkins, and He's like been expelled from all these different schools, and he's sent to this academy called Bullsworth Academy, which is like a boarding school for just like all these terrible kids. And at the time it got quite a lot of flack because it was seen as like a bullying simulator. But actually in the game, the plot is that he's trying to stop the bullies, but in the gameplay you can take a control of it and like actually bully people, so you can be a bit of a git in it. But just so like if I'm gonna look at like sort of what, like we were saying about what makes a Dreamcast game in spirit, it's like what makes a Shenmue game in spirit. And it's like, so at this academy, each kid that walks around you has a name. They have personalities. They're all voiced, like they all got different voices. There's even like a feature where you take photographs of all the kids for the yearbook, and they're all in there, like named individually. They have routines. They come out of the dorm. They go to class when the bell rings. They play pranks on each other. They talk to each other. Like, so you've got that kind of like world around you that's going on all at the same time. And then you have this sort of more, I suppose, kind of like immersive element. So you have a lot of like seasons in the game. So there's like a whole bit where it's winter and like you can slip on ice and it's snowing, and there's like Christmas stuff in town. Yeah, it's kind of like this living world around you. And then if you wanted to make it even more Shenmue, Bully kind of embodies the mundanity aspect of Shenmue in the sense that like you're kind of creating your own fun by playing pranks on people. You're throwing marbles for people to trip up on. And I just think there's something quite sort of innocent, and obviously it's like juvenile to it. And it just kind of grounds it a bit more. You're just at school playing pranks on your classmates. Oh, and obviously half of the game is beat 'em up combat as well. And yeah, you walk around, you fight someone, and there's a cutscene. You can get buy drinks from vending machines, play arcade games, and yeah, I just think that like whoever the guys making this may have had like a few tips from Shenmue. I think it's like a more immersive game than people give it credit for, and I think like in that way it shares a lot with Shenmue, I suppose. And Bully for PS2 or Xbox 360, which is on backwards compatibility, so you can get it on new Xboxes.
I actually haven't played Bully in a very long time, so there aren't really a lot of specifics I can speak to outside of, that just kind of captures that density in a way that that I think is really cool. But also Rockstar's built on that too, right? With Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2 specifically. Those games are so dense with, I don't know, it's almost, and they got a lot of flack at the time, right? As a studio, you're in constant crunch mode. There's a reason these games are so expensive, is because they're doing all these little attention to detail things, and developers and designers have to implement and test all of that stuff, and so they're in constant crunch mode for however long. I forget what the I forget some of the details of what those working conditions were like, but as a result, like that's kind of what they put that towards is rendering horse testicles and pooping and shave kits and having entire mechanics around these seemingly disjointed, superfluous aspects of the game just because you can. Like, there's these things you can do in the game just because you can, and that was Shenmue, right? Like, many of the things you did in that game with buying capsule toys or buying sodas or the gambling, like there wasn't a lot of they didn't really feed into a broader gameplay loop. They were just there because you could do them. Like, you could spend time playing darts at the arcade or Hang On or Space Harrier or whatever, but it wasn't necessarily doing anything. It didn't have any impact on the narrative or give you any advantages as you continue to play it otherwise, which I think is kind of cool. I am here for games that just give you stuff to do for the sake of it. But that also requires the player to kind of derive their own fun and have that intrinsic motivation to keep engaging in that space, right? Like if in Shenmue I can make knocking on people's doors or just following people about their day as something that I'm getting enjoyment out of. Like that's the gameplay loop for me. That's kind of a niche thing that I can understand why other people would be bored to tears. And so, yeah, a lot of Rockstar's stuff, they kind of lean into that as well. The difference being that their games do resonate with a lot of people, and that shit is super freaking popular, and they sell a ton. So, yeah, maybe that's the difference.
I suppose what makes Bully the more Dreamcasty of their games is that the fact that it didn't sell as well as Grand Theft Auto or something. It was actually not that successful for them, and unfortunately they have started and scrapped a sequel many times. And also I suppose the main major difference compared to GTA and stuff is that the world is a lot more contained and smaller, which is actually nicer because it kind of gives you this more familiarity with it. Whereas sometimes in GTA I'm driving around and I'm like, where's this again?
Mike, have you played Bully at all? Anything to comment on with this one?
It makes the mundane interesting. It's been a while since I've played it, to be fair. I think I've got the Xbox One version of the cardboard cover over the 360 version, if I remember rightly. Been a while since I've played it, but I can definitely see how it would be that sort of Dreamcast feel to it, yeah. Nice.
Okay. Well, speaking of you, Mike, we're going to move on to you next. And what's your first choice for Dreamcast Spirit Embody game words that I'm saying?
Yeah, so obviously I've listened to everyone else's choices, and everyone's gone for some really out there choices, and I've just gone straight ahead, simple, really obvious choice. For me, the single game which embodies the Dreamcast spirit in the years past, for me, would be a series of games which are often said to be spiritual successors to Shenmue. They aren't really in many ways. However, there's one particular title of the series which I feel is possibly the only time since having a Dreamcast where I felt the same. The game is Yakuza 0. I love the Yakuza series anyway, but Yakuza 0 especially has a lot of Shenmue vibes to it. And it's probably the only game in the series where I can really see the comparison to be somewhat valid. It's from the fact it's set in the late 80s, so it's a very similar sort of time frame. Obviously, all of the tropes from the series anyway. So the mini games, which very much like Shenmue. There is a certain amount of doing mundane things as well, and having it make fun. I mean, going to the restaurants and buying or perusing the menu and then picking some random food from the menu. It's all very much, I'd say fan service, but it's probably not quite fan service. It's more, it's enveloping you in the actual culture. I think it tries to do that much like Shenmue did. There's some obvious differences. I think the fighting, let's be honest about it, there's not many Dreamcast games which did that style of gameplay. I suppose, I can't think of any at all, to be honest. Dynamite Cop, I'm not sure. So the action side of it isn't really that much of a Dreamcast style, but the aesthetics and the feel of the game is really, really heavily Shenmue related and Dreamcast feel as well. The series as a whole, I think, has it anyway. Right from the original ones on PS2, I think they would fit perfectly onto a Dreamcast or Dreamcast successor. But it's really with Zero where it's taken to a different level. It's quite self-effacing as well, so there's lots of humour in the Yakuza series. But when it does play it seriously, and when it does play it for the serious side of it, very much like Shenmue, it works fantastically. There's not that many games like this which can really play it seriously and get away with it. So yeah, I love it for that reason. I think it also carries on to possibly Judgment and its sequel as well. I think that's also quite similar to the Shenmue vibe. I think probably slightly more, but I haven't played that quite as much. But yeah, for me, Yakuza series. I know it's Sega games was probably a cheat, but obviously, it's got links to Shenmue as well. But yeah, for me, Yakuza 0.
Awesome. I've played a very small amount of one Yakuza game. I'm not sure which one it is, but so one person in particular basically sold me on Yakuza, and I bought every single game. I've never had a chance to play them, but I know that I want to at some point. So yes. It's not something I can speak on personally, but it sounds. I mean, Yakuza 0 specifically sounds fantastic. I mean, Lewis, Brian, have both of you played a Yakuza game at all?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lewis.
I'll probably have less to say about it than Brian because I haven't played Yakuza too much. I think that it is important to say it's not exactly like Shenmue. I mean, obviously, I know Mike wasn't going for that at all, but like, I like the other day we had some kind of troll on Twitter. I know I should ignore people like this, but like they were like, "Oh, why'd you play Shenmue when Yakuza exists?" And it's like, there's something slightly not there for me with Yakuza that I think is in Shenmue. I think maybe it's the character of Ryo and what he's going through, maybe that kind of draws me to that more. But I did like Yakuza 0. And, the amusing thing that you could say is like, you play as men angrily walking around a Japanese neighborhood. You beat up a load of thugs, chug a drink, and then you go to the arcade to play Space Harrier. So, it's like the same game almost. But the only what I'd say about Yakuza that maybe is slightly different, but like Mike was saying, it's like almost like basically the same game. It embodies that spirit a lot. It has that like people have said before, like Shenmue is almost like you're on a little mini holiday, and you definitely feel that when you're walking around. Like the area in Yakuza. I think Yakuza is the only thing I'd say is the difference is that Yakuza is a lot faster paced, and I feel like the style of fighting is a little bit more like kind of a beat 'em up. So I think that's like kind of the difference, and I fucking love the bits in I feel like it takes those sort of almost quick time events of Shenmue, which kind of didn't. It could have taken those a bit further in Shenmue, but it didn't. It was just sort of like, you press these buttons and he manages to get a guy in a headlock or something. Whereas in Yakuza, it's like you're picking up a bike and you're smashing a dude with it, or like there's a scene in one of the later games where like you stick a dude's head in a microwave in like a convenience store, or like it just these ridiculous, almost like finisher moves that I thought was amazing, and they have that kind of dry humor to them that I think is a little. You see that in Shenmue as well. That sort of it's serious, but then there's like sort of like the bit with like the duck race, or like like when he's talking to Fang Mei in the second one. There's sort of that kind of like little kind of charming bit of humor, and it's sort of the same in Yakuza where like you've got these like tough guys, but then something kind of funny will happen, and it's got that kind of humor. So there's definitely a lot of similarities.
I think that you said about the fact it's more action packed. It is. But I think it's a logical extension of the Shenmue series to an extent in terms of it is very action packed. There is over the top fighting, but unlike other open world games, because it is an open world game, but it's very much predetermined. Certain sections of the city you can walk around in, which is again very similar to Shenmue. But when you want to just spend some time, you can spend some time sort of relaxing by doing mundane things. It's a bit different than GTA or Red Dead Redemption, where you can do that still, but it always feels like I'm not sure. You can sort of do chaos, or you have to make sometimes your own enjoyment. In Yakuza, it's very much, go to a bridge and do some fishing, which again very similar to Shenmue. Again, perusing the shops. It's just a laid back experience if you want it to be.
A sort of a appreciation of the mundane, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think this could be an entire episode. I don't even know what thread to pull. There's so much there you could talk about between these two games and how they what they share and how they differ. One thing that's a little just kind of picking up on what I mentioned earlier, how like all these disparate gameplay types, styles and mechanics, whether they feed into each other or whether they just exist as their own thing. I think that's a pretty big difference between these two. Whereas, Shenmue, all the random diversions you can do kind of don't really feed into anything and do require that intrinsic, that just like internal motivation to find your own fun in them. Whereas Yakuza is really well designed in bringing those things towards a broader purpose that do benefit you as you continue to play the game. I mean, I'm just thinking like Yakuza, just because it was the last one I played, but Like a Dragon, or Yakuza 8, where you had like this entire mini game that was it was a real estate management simulator, and you had to run like the monthly board meetings, and you had to invest in properties, and you had to maximize all of your revenue for this company as it was growing. But in doing that, you also got a lot of money each quarter to use in the main game. You would meet a lot of characters you could recruit, and one of them would be like an integral person who's would be in your party, but you'd also have your summons or pound mates, as they call them, that you would meet through just trying to recruit them to join your company, and then they can also use them at different points in the game. So I loved how it found really clever and creative ways to feed all of its different mini games and other things or excursions towards a broader purpose. And yeah, I mean, the level of density is also a point of differentiation. I mean, Shenmue, you are connected to that world in a way that is painstaking, to the point of maybe even being exhausting, which I love. But, I'm not always in the mood to sift through each and every drawer, or to be able to, dial on the rotary phone, or to that gets into, or pick up objects and manipulate them. I think that is amazing, but I think there's a reason why Yakuza streamlines that stuff and it still immerses you in the space, and it's still very dense with all the things you can do in Kamurocho and the other locales, and it definitely shares that virtual tourism kind of vibe, as you were alluding to, Lewis, but it balances it with kind of the more palatable, easy to more, swift mechanics to kind of usher you along without getting bogged down too much in the minutia of the space, which I don't know. I think there's a lot of enjoyment through either approach, but I do think that's probably why Yakuza is a little more popular, or why it's endured the way it has. The Yakuza games are just an incredibly engaging, over the top, exaggerated crime drama. And the characters, as you all mentioned, they just exude, they just are teeming with charm. And even just the people you meet for one-off side quests and stuff have such involved situations that make those incredibly memorable. Even if the gameplay loop it's asking you to do, even if it's like a fetch quest, it's still wrapping that in such a charismatic mini narrative, moment to moment, with the way all these characters in this world interact with each other, and all of the twists and turns that it kind of throws. I just think that's incredibly endearing, and it's not necessarily something I go to Shenmue for, but it is definitely something that I love about the Yakuza games.
Awesome. Well, no, that's cool. I think I think it's like Mike said, it's maybe the obvious choice in terms of the fact that this is what everybody kind of goes to, and especially when they're thinking about Shenmue, even if it's not quite Shenmue. But I think it's the conversation we've just had here and the points that have been brought up, I think it's one that's well worth mentioning with this particular topic. So yeah, I think that's great. And once again, it's made me want to play the games. I just haven't, just need to find the time because there are so many now. And then you mentioned Judgment as well, and those are games that I haven't even got yet. So this is going to have to add more games to my ever-growing list of games to eventually play one day.
I had to do mine in Lockbang. The only way I actually got into Yakuza was in Lockbang.
Oh, yeah. No, that's it. I could see how that would be a great opportunity to marathon the games.
It's a perfect game, yeah. It's a perfect game in Lockdown because it's a pure escapism, but in a realistic world. You don't want to go to sort of the Wild West or San Andreas. You want to actually sort of escape into a real world, and that's what Yakuza was.
Amazing, awesome. So we've each got 2 games. So I'm going to move back down the list to go through our second games as well. So it'll be back to me, and I've picked a very different game to Blur for my second game, and it's more reminiscent of something that Tetsuya Mizuguchi would have done on the Dreamcast. Primarily because he did also make this game, and I think that's my theme here. Is I'm picking people who then went on to make other things outside the Dreamcast, but then the kind of the soul, the essence of the Dreamcast, kind of almost followed with them. And so obviously we know Tetsuya very well for Rez and for Space Channel 5. I don't think he directed Space Channel 5, but obviously he was involved with his company. We had Q Games set up, and from Q Games we got many amazing games from Tetsuya and his team, and one of them, which originally came out not that long after the death of the Dreamcast, was something called Every Extend. And that was kind of, I think it was a Flash game it began as, and then they did a version on the PSP called Every Extend Extra. And then the version I want to talk about, they kept adding words beginning with E essentially until they got to this one. So this one's known as E4, and it's called Every Extend Extra Extreme. And this came out on the Xbox 360, the arcade. They started to do the arcade indie games for that. So it came out for that around 2007, I think it was, 2007, 2008. And this is it's a very simple game. So in terms of graphics, it's probably more akin to something like Geometry Wars than it is to anything like Rez. But it still has that kind of wireframe aesthetic that Rez had. And Every Extend Extra Extreme, I'm just going to call it E4 from now on because it's going to be difficult to keep saying Every Extend Extra Extreme every time I want to talk about it. But yeah, so the thing that makes me think about the Dreamcast is it's not just the fact that it has some similar aesthetics to Rez, because if that was it, then it wouldn't be right. But it's also the fact that it's taking that kind of musicality that something like Rez and Space Channel 5 had. The fact that they would, especially with Rez, the actions that you did in the game would have an effect on the music. So the shooting different things would kind of add little instrumentations to the music that was in the background, and the music could swell and get more as you went through the levels. And with Every Extend Extra Extreme, I said I wasn't going to say it, but I can't help it. Yeah. With that game, it's a similar thing. So the point of this game, the whole thing is it's a very simple game, like I say, and you play this kind of ship that you steer around the screen. You're in one space, the screen doesn't move, and there's lots of objects, almost like asteroids and things like that, just different shaped objects. I think they're like coloured circles. I'm pulling a lot of this from my memory. But what you would have to do is you would have to find the right spot to detonate your ship, and then for that to then have like a chain reaction. So it would then make all of these other objects on screen explode, and they would then go on to make objects next to them explode, and you got scores based on how many objects you got, what types of objects you got, and stuff like that. So it was, and then you would kind of respawn on the screen, and you do it again. You die if you kind of ran into an enemy before you'd exploded. So there was just this. It kind of combined so many different things, but it did it in such a way that it was its own its own game. Like you could look at it and go, okay, well that's similar to maybe Asteroids, but you're not shooting the asteroids, but you are maneuvering through. Or it's similar to Res in that when you explode your ship and it kind of sets off that chain reaction, that kind of feeds into the music that you're listening to and adds layers to it. It kind of mashes up so much and makes its own thing out of it. And I think that is the Dreamcast spirit that I think that brings. It has that Res thing. Yes, it's made by Tetsuya Mizuguchi, but it takes a simple concept and simple ideas from maybe other things, mixes it into this one game that is incredibly addictive and exciting to look at, even though it's simple, and really cool to listen to. And that's very similar to a lot of the arcade games that Sega were coming out with at the time. Obviously they would be much more visually stimulating. Something like Crazy Taxi would be visually stimulating, but it used a very simple gameplay loop to hook you and make you want to keep going and doing the same thing over and over again. And that's very similar to E4 in that, it's incredibly simple to pick up and play, but you would just want to keep having goes on it. Like literally I could sit there for hours playing it and get completely immersed in the experience, because it's just that one more go kind of game where you could imagine people feeding coins into a slot in an arcade if it would ever become an arcade game, because it's just got that kind of feel to it. So to me, that's probably why it embodies the Dreamcast spirit. It's that arcadiness of it, but also the mashups of the genres, and also Tetsuya Mizuguchi taking ideas that he'd done with Res and other games and kind of fusing them to this new, Xbox arcade title. So yeah, I think that really does. I mean, if you're going to play it, you can play it multiple ways. You can pick up a physical copy for the PSP, but the best way to play it, and I think you can still play it on backwards compatibility, I believe, would be E4 for the Xbox 360. I think that's just the best version of that game, because it adds so much to it, and I definitely recommend it to anybody who hasn't tried it before. It's something well worth doing.
I've never played this. In fact, I think I'd never heard of it until you mentioned it, I think, on a previous podcast. And it's very simple. It almost reminds me of something that might have come out on, like, maybe the Nintendo DS. Like, there was a lot of games on there, like Electroplankton, was it called? And Lumens, like these sort of futuristic kind of neon-looking, kind of simple graphics kind of games. Like, obviously here you're dealing with just a lot of shapes, and it's really interesting, like watching gameplay, and like there's sort of that similarity to Res in the sense that it gets more vivid as you get more sort of further in.
Absolutely, yeah. The shapes and the colours change.
Yeah,
maybe sometimes become a bit more. I can say in depth, but that's not a very good way to describe a shape or a color, is it? In depth, but you know what I mean. There's more to it, but that also makes it harder, obviously. So that because you've got so much going on screen, you're having to try and avoid, blowing up before you blow yourself up. So it's it gets more and more interesting on screen, but also much more difficult as you go, trying to get those chain reactions and those scores, those high scores. Just it gets more and more difficult, and that's why the one more turn thing comes in, because you can see it becoming this amazing, colourful, vibrant thing, and you want to keep going, but it's so difficult. You have to you end up going back to the start and having to start all over again. And you want to get back to that point where the music's gotten to this really cool point, and the visuals are really popping. So yeah, absolutely.
It feels like if this was on the Dreamcast, which I could see it happening, it'd be like some sick import that like everyone knew about. It's like, oh yeah, I got it from Japan back in the day. That kind of
like
thing.
a Cosmic Smash type thing.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. That kind of like it doesn't. I feel like it may have during that era might have come out like in Europe and America, but like it feels it has that vibe of like you say, like a Cosmic Smash, or there's plenty of other like great puzzle games, like sort of rhythm games as well, that remained exclusive to Japan, that I think this sort of fits the mold of a little bit more. Sort of it'd be a very good import if it was on the Dreamcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to I kind of want somebody to try and port it to the Dreamcast now. I have this. I know I say this quite often. I'm like, oh, this game would fit really well, but it does feel like you could fit that on the Dreamcast as it is, and it would work.
Or at least a sort of like a indie sort of spiritual take on it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's something that obviously Tetsuya has left behind now. Similar to Lumines, or is it Lumines? I don't know how people pronounce that.
I think they call it Lumines in the menu.
Okay, Lumines. But yeah, I always call it Lumines. I just just how I want to call it. But yeah, but Lumines, it's it's an incredible puzzle game. But obviously he's not done a version of that for quite a long time now. I think they remade the original for the last gen, but then they haven't touched it since because obviously he's had great success with Tetris Effect, and who knows what he'll do next. But there's a lot of these games that have been left behind, and I'm not 100% sure that it's available on backwards compatibility. But yeah, so there's that thing, and even if it was compatible, it's still one of those things you'd have to go and discover somehow because it's not front and center on stores, right? You're not just gonna hop onto the Xbox store and find E4. You'd have to go looking for it yourself. You'd have to know about it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be lost to a lot of people. Hopefully, there's a fair few people like me who remember it, and who or who have an idea of it and want to go play it. But there's going to be so many people who won't get the opportunity. So having somebody, like you say, like an indie dev do a take on it for Dreamcast, I think that could be incredibly cool.
Yeah, hopefully someone revives it and it lives on in the future. Unlike E3, which is canceled. So I don't know. Maybe E4 can live on.
Yeah, E4. Let's hope.
Good segue. And it is sad about E3 because you think about it and, it's been going on. I can't remember when it started, but obviously the Dreamcast and Dreamcast games were announced there. Or, maybe the Dreamcast itself wasn't announced there, but Dreamcast games were, and obviously it was shown off there. And now this thing that almost tethers us to that part of the past, you could go there and go, oh, I wonder what this was like when Sega were here, like showing off Dreamcast games. You can't do that anymore. It's just not going to be around. So it's like a part of gaming history is just gone now, right? Which is really sad. But yeah, I think that's that for that one. It doesn't sound. I mean, I don't know, Brian. Have you played it, or Mike? Have you played E4?
I've not played it. I'm very interested though. After you described it,
yeah, definitely worth a go. I'm going to try and track it down and send a link in the chat to see if it's still something that you can do. But I mean, even if you can't get an Xbox, if you can find a physical copy of Every Extend Extreme for PSP, it's very similar. Just I think a few of the game modes that they added on for the E4 version, Every Extend Extra Extreme, they're not present, but it's still the same basic game. So yeah.
Yeah, I know it was back in the day, it was like kind of mainly a Xbox Live Arcade game is what I associate it with, but did they have a disc version as well?
No, so I think it was only ever released digitally for Xbox. So yeah, the only physical copy of the game you can get is the PSP version, which isn't quite as fully featured. We were talking about for a while, we talked about things that are in the past, so things that have already come out, we've already played, that have, traditional games. And I think Brian now has something that's, up and coming. It's been around for a while, but it's now taken on maybe the form that is going to make it the most popular, more popular than it's ever been. And so you're talking about a different kind of game, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's my second answer, which is also a cop-out, and that is VR stuff, I guess. Yeah, so VR, where do I begin? Because this is kind of an extension of the answer I gave earlier with like indie games that are continuing to explore that pioneering spirit to try to create new types of games that didn't exist before, which I feel like is what Sega in that era was all about. But one of the tools that I think Sega had in their innovations at the time that they really leaned into were peripherals, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, especially in the arcades, and also they released a number of them on the Dreamcast. I mean, with Samba de Amigos Maracas, or or the fishing controller, fishing rod for Sega Bass Fishing or Get Bass. You had the Seaman, the microphone, right, where you could talk to Seaman. In arcades, you had stuff like Ferrari or F355 Challenge, which had the 3 screens. It was kind of a wraparound cabinet. There's one of these at one of my local arcades still, so I actually play it every now and then, and it's really cool. Like you can kind of see how they really try to limit the distance or reduce the distance between what the player was doing in real life and what the action and what would happen on screen. I think they were really trying to find ways, both through the presentation as well as how you interact with the peripherals to draw people in. And so really VR, I think when I see what a lot of developers have been releasing for VR platforms over the last several years, is a natural extension of what Sega was doing back in its arcade Dreamcast heyday, with a lot of its peripheral-based games. And, I think I thought of this as I was playing Gran Turismo 7 has a VR mode. Mm-hmm. I also picked up a PS5 wheel for really cheap, and so I've been pairing both the VR mode with the GT7 with the wheel, and its force feedback and everything, and the combination of those things is kind of astounding. And given that I have also played F355 Challenge recently, there's a lot of connection there in terms of what it's accomplishing for really immersing players in that space, and how you really feel where you are on the track at all times. It connects you a little bit to your periphery, so you see cars and the track side all around you just by looking around in a similar way that you could in F355, and it kind of leans into that simulation aspect to really get people to think about their approach to the real life courses as they would if they were actually trying to train to be a race car driver. And there's just something that I don't know, it kind of just clicks in my brain a little bit differently when I am behind the wheel of a car and I can see all of the dash panels and all of the buttons and the seats and everything. I don't know, there's something there that I feel like that's now my preferred way to play that type of game. And I think it's just really an extension of what Sega was already doing. I mean, back in the day with Samba de Amigo maracas and the different height sensors, I mean, Beat Saber and other music games nowadays kind of have carried that torch forward. Stuff like House of the Dead 2 with light gun games, there's a clear connection and influence to stuff like Until Dawn, Rush of Blood, and Switchback VR, which just came out, which is basically House of the Dead 2 on a roller coaster, and of course literal ports of Res Infinite and you mentioned Cosmic Smash. Those are natural. I feel like those are natural fits for VR by allowing people to engage with them in a little bit of different way that takes the, I don't know, it separates the controller as or a typical controller as I don't know if I want to call it a barrier, but there's something a little more immersive when I can just look at my targets and it tracks, for example, Res, it tracks your eye movements. So you can actually do a lot of the targeting just by looking at the enemies. You don't even have to turn your head, although you can do that also. And then, of course, leaning into the spectacle of the audio and visual and the way it tries to push 3D audio, especially if you have a headset or a surround sound system, pairing that with the VR perspective. It's just throwing a lot out there to try to draw people in. And again, it all kind of harkens back to, I think, what Sega was really striving for in its arcade heyday. So, and there was also that literal Space Channel 5 sequel that came out a few years ago. I think I reviewed that for the Junkyard, and it wasn't my favorite VR game, but they definitely took it in that direction. And I think there's probably a lot of other Dreamcast games that might naturally fit that if they were adapted in VR today, as we're about to see with Cosmic Smash. So I don't know. It's just kind of cool to see all of that evolve with the technology, I suppose, and all the developers that are just interested in carrying those things forward and building on the ideas that Sega was really pushing back in the day.
Yeah. I just wanted to add actually to what Brian was saying. Dreamcast came at a time where like games were still kind of like being thought out and like, you know, pushed to their limit, whereas now maybe you'd get this more in the indie space, but like I feel like we've kind of like reached sort of like a plateau where, you know, an open world game is pretty much sorted. A lot of them follow quite a similar formula, for example. Whereas like when you look at the VR, although it's not personally my thing, but like for a while I used to be quite cynical about like, oh, you know, all the games on it look like tech demos. They're all just trying to sort of give you an idea of what's going on. It's not like fully developed. It's not fully there yet. But then like, I suppose recently I've become a little bit less cynical about it. And I'm thinking more like, actually, like people kind of want to see those boundaries pushed and like this idea of what could VR be. And I suppose that's what Sega were doing on the Dreamcast, is like, what can we do with, you know, whether it be like Brian was saying, peripherals, or, you know, like a pet simulator, or like, you know, even online play. It's like VR kind of has that primitiveness, and I mean that in not a disparaging way. Like it has that room to like develop as like a proof of concept almost in that way, I suppose. So that kind of reminds me a little bit of the Dreamcast, of like, you know, throwing all these ideas out and seeing what sticks. And it's kind of interesting to watch as it evolves.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what's interesting to me is, I mean, especially since we've spoken to him on a previous podcast, but that Jörg is almost like, not, I wouldn't say he's at the forefront because VR has been going for some time, but at the moment, I mean, he's releasing VR games. He's got one out, literally just come out in the last worker, and as we've mentioned before, there's C Smash VRS, which is the kind of successor to Cosmic Smash. You know, he's doing these amazing things, and he's directly influenced by the Dreamcast. And he used to write for Dreamcast magazine. He used to know. You'll have to remind me of the name, Brian. That the guy who came up with Blue Stinger and Ill Bleed.
Oh, Shinya Nishigaki.
There you go. Yeah, so knew him directly and was therefore put into Ill Bleed because of his friendship with the guy.
Yeah.
Has been influenced by Dreamcast for so long and has always wanted to do something Dreamcast related, which is why C Smash is so important to him. You know, also is incredibly into VR. And I mean, whenever I've spoken to him, he's mentioned to me before, you know, the Sega's attempt at VR back before the Dreamcast, which went nowhere, never got released, but they did try to release a kind of a retail consumer grade VR headset before anybody else did. So it's almost like VR is kind of, you know, the like you said, the sensibilities of VR, but also VR as a consumer grade, you know, gaming platform is very much tied to Sega. So that Dreamcast spirit is in it, you know, by definition. But in terms of people like Jörg who are making VR games, you know, they're directly influenced by the Dreamcast. So it's, yeah, VR games as a whole. There's so many reasons why that Dreamcast spirit is there, and I think you know, from what all you guys have said, to the fact that we had you know, Sega trying to do their own VR platform, to Jörg who's now making, you know, some of the biggest VR games that are coming out at the moment. You know, we have that direct influence from Sega and from the Dreamcast, and I think that's pretty amazing. And I guess a lot of people therefore would probably say, hey, well, VR gaming is where Dreamcast enjoyers should be going to next, because it's going to carry on that spirit, and there's going to be those really interesting experiences that you can have.
Yeah, and you know, and for better or worse, I think that connection extends to a lot of the challenges of how niche you know, VR has been, even though it it gains traction in certain circles, but there are like real barriers to entry there for people who have motion sickness or are very sensitive to that stuff, that like also requires a lot of innovation and ingenuity on the part of both the hardware and platform holders and manufacturers, as well as developers to try to make those experiences more accessible for people who would otherwise be vomiting after 10 minutes of it. So, all around, I think and that's also a big barrier. I mean, that's the reason ultimately why Sega didn't release their VR headset. Yeah. I mean, the tech wasn't there. When you have that at 15 frames a second, and you're not able to guarantee people a stable experience, that's a lot of lost lunches. So the industry is still dealing with that, but I mean, they are making a lot of headway with some of the comfort options that that a lot of developers have come up with, and so it's really fun to see that in real time as they try to kind of refine and mold the medium to be more marketable, and I think they're making good headway on that. It's just it's a long process, and it's a process that we've seen for many decades now, since when Sega was trying to work through it.
Yeah, there we go. I think and that's a really good one, a very interesting one to talk about, and again, like with Yakuza, maybe it could be the genesis of an entire episode of its own to talk about all those games. You mentioned the Space Channel 5 sequel, we've got Sea Smash, and we've got all the games that have been influenced by Dreamcast games. It could be interesting just to look into those in more detail at some point, and where VR is going, and why Dreamcast users should be interested in it. But yeah, there's...
Honestly, every single game you all have mentioned or like topic that's come up in this conversation could probably be its own episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're listening into this and there's a particular thing you've taken away from this that you'd love to hear us talk more about, let us know. We'd love to kind of do more stuff that you've suggested. Obviously, if it makes sense, we won't just do anything. We're not just going to talk about whatever you tell us to talk about. But if it makes sense and you want to hear about it, of course, we'll do an episode.
You can't force us. You can't force us.
You can try, but you will fail. All right, let's move on to Lewis's second choice, and this is very different from Bully. So what's your second choice, Lewis?
So this is Sunset Overdrive, which it's one of those games where it's sort of like it can be quite easily surface level compared to Jet Set Radio. I feel like this game just embodies like just the color and energy of that era, and it came at a time where I kind of wanted it as well, where a lot of games in the generation, so this was like I think it was a launch or like quite near to launch title for the Xbox One, and unfortunately I think it got kind of swept up in that whole like always online thing where obviously they showed it at like E3, and it's getting a lot of mentions today, E3, and people kind of just didn't really look into it. At the time, maybe they wanted another game on the Xbox, maybe a more sort of gritty game, like the PS4 had launched with like Last of Us Remake, for example, and then here you were with this ridiculous, over the top, colourful game. And it was so much fun as well. I know the grinding element often draws a lot of comparisons to Jet Set Radio. Obviously, the game is colourful too, so that's another comparison. But I feel like the overall gameplay of Sunset Overdrive probably has more in common with something like Sonic Adventure or maybe a later Tony Hawk game. It's got such a good flow, and the way you move throughout the sunny world that the game is based in, and you're jumping on things and zip lining and blasting through enemies at top speed in like a continuous combo. It almost brought me back to when I was playing levels like Emerald Coast or City Escape, just high energy speed, and I suppose that made Sunset Overdrive an outlier in the moment in which it was released. It was energetic, it was rowdy, it was rebellious, it was cartoonish. It was silly, and it just was fun for the sake of fun, and I think that's a thing we saw with the Dreamcast. You know, games like Jet Set Radio, definitely Crazy Taxi. You know, you're speeding around, causing all this trouble in your wake, and you're doing it just because it's for fun. You know, and in Sunset Overdrive, your character's cracking jokes and breaking the fourth wall, and the game doesn't take itself seriously. And at the time, it was all capital G gamer, Call of Duty, you know, kill streaks. And here was this game just being a bit crazy. And I suppose it was daring to be different, and especially for a console launch title. And I suppose that's the reason why I didn't do well. But it's such a shame because Insomniac put a lot of love into it, and you know, from the ridiculous plot elements to the boss fights, all these little details, you could really tell they had a lot of fun making it, and I loved every second playing it. It was brilliant.
Nice. I can't say I don't think I've actually played this one, or if I have, it's not been for that long. I do have it because I took it upon myself to buy all of the exclusives for Xbox One, of which there were very few.
That's why I found out about it, because of that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's so little. There's like was it Reboot, the one about the girl and the little robot dog?
Recore, yeah.
Yeah. So there's all those kind of things, and you know, the Halos and stuff like that, but there were so few, and this one was kind of a standout. So I've not played it, but I do own it. I mean, Mike, is this one that you've played at all?
Yeah, I bought it on release, played it for a while. Don't have many memories of the game, to be honest with you. I think I got sidetracked by the games at the time.
Yeah, I think it kind of got overlooked, and it takes that moment of you haven't got everything else jumping out at you. So, you know, like I say, it was around the launch of the Xbox, so there's probably other things people were playing. I got this game for £3.50 pre-owned, and it's like, wow. I hate to sort of imply that monetary value has any kind of feel on like a game's quality, but like it just feels almost kind of unfair. It's like, why is this £3.50? It's better than that. Like this was worth so much to me, the amount of hours I spent with it, and like, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's priceless, I suppose, in a way. But yeah. Anyway.
They should be jacking up the cost there.
Yeah.
To reflect the sentimental value that people have.
That's why all the Dreamcast games are expensive, right?
Yeah, I mean, true. And it's also on Game Pass, I believe. Like it's pretty easily available.
Yeah, it's super easy to get, isn't it? Yeah,
I loved it. Yeah, I also got it when it came out, and you know, I enjoyed it at the time for being just kind of a charming game that was a little less. It took itself less seriously and was a little more, a little less cynical, but also it, you know, did have a rebellious spirit, as you were alluding to.
Yeah.
We've talked about that, and that is part of the Dreamcast spirit, right? Like that is a lot of what made stuff like Jet Set Radio or even like Seaman what they are, because or Crazy Taxi, like, you know, they all have kind of like that rebelliousness that kind of goes back to. Yeah, this goes back to the idea of like, well, let's do something that gives a player something else to do, just because every other game is about shooting stuff or platforming. Like, let's give them something new. But then Sunset Overdrive is kind of cool because in its approach to being an open world, like it forces you to think about how you get around it very differently than a typical, because if you try to run around and run and gun, like, you know, if you play it like Ratchet and Clank, you're going to go very slow and you're going to die very quickly because the enemies are constantly bombarding you. But like it really encourages you to find things, you know, cars to jump on, to bounce up to rails, like, I mean, use the telephone wires and guardrails and stuff to grind across the map, and things to bounce off of, and awnings to get higher.
You do that like Sonic thing on the water as well, like
yeah, and just getting around that space was almost a puzzle in itself. It was a very environmental puzzly kind of thing, because like while I'm trying to simultaneously shoot because the whole premise of the game is like everybody drinks this defective energy drink from Fizzco, and then they turn into monstrosities or zombies and shit, and then you have like Fizzco trying to, like, I don't know, contain everything with their robot army and and then there's a bunch of like gangs and stuff that are all doing their own raider thing. So it's kind of a fun world that you're just trapped in this city with all of this stuff going on and this chaos. But it's like, yeah, the way you avoid it or the way you just keep going through it is to find clever ways to to get around the environment. And you're right. It does tap into maybe Tony Hawk in that way. Certainly Jet Set Radio, where it's like, oh yeah, no, he uses verticality really in a really interesting way. It kind of rewards you for taking that extra effort to figure out an efficient way to get to where you need to go across the map. And I think that was just really fun.
Yeah, I think you spend a lot of your time like not even touching the floor in this game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Like the humor is like quite in your face, but I feel like if you kind of just take it don't take it too seriously, it's a lot of fun. So yeah
I mean it's a very different game, but I get very similar vibes from Hi-Fi Rush as Sunset Overdrive, like the kind of the style of it and the humor of it. And it uses that cell shading like Jet Set Radio, and it's got it's kind of musical in how the combat works, having to do it to the beat. So it kind of gives me a kind of Res vibes from that. So that, I mean, it's a proper aside this, but that when I think about Sunset Overdrive, I now also think about Hi-Fi Rush, and I think that kind of has a very Dreamcast feel to it as well.
I think there was a thing on Twitter where like one of the the areas in a Hi-Fi Rush had like people saying that's definitely like supposed to look like the lid of a Dreamcast. Like I think there's and I think there's a few sort of very obvious references to Jet Set Radio. So I think there is a definite like undertone of it in that game. But yeah, I've not played it myself to know really.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But it sounds like I should be playing Sunset Overdrive.
It's held up well. I actually would recommend playing it today. As far as the play is held up well. I don't know, but yeah, as you were talking about, Lewis, like the humor, I don't know, it is of the time, like the early 2010s, kind of that snappy Joss Whedon kind of quippy shit that it's like nobody talks that way, but like, yeah, it's fun.
I feel like the humor can just be summed up by like just going, fuck yeah, that's the humor in this game. That's the whole vibe of this game. Like, but it's fun. It's like it's energetic, and I love it. And it also features a really odd boss in one of the DLCs where it's basically one of the game devs on like a screen, and yeah, like actual a photo of him, and it's moving, and you have to just kill him basically. It's like so like fourth wall and just not taking itself seriously at all. Like, there's a bit where like the character full on just says something like, "Oh, I didn't even need to check game facts" or something. It's like some of it's a little bit like, but yeah,
nice.
Yeah, there's some cringe in there for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Mike's second choice. Now, Mike, I've seen you change this multiple times. Are you sure this is your choice now?
No, but I'm going to go with it.
Okay, go for it.
So yeah, I wanted to include a racing game because for me, racing games are synonymous with a Dreamcast, especially for me when I first had one. So I for a couple of choices, I went through sort of the Grid and Race Driver series because I think they feel very similar to the Le Mans game on Dreamcast and have that sort of vibe. Also, we have Project Gotham Racing, but I thought that's too easy. Also went for Flat Out Ultimate Carnage, which is a great game, but didn't really have enough Dreamcast connections. The game I've gone for is a game which is a little bit like Sunset Overdrive. It's very underrated. It was overlooked massively at the time, but it's one of my favourite games. It's a game called ONRUSH. I've spoken about it on the podcast when it came out quite a lot. Basically, it's a vehicular combat game. It's made by the same guys who made MotorStorm, which in itself is it's sort of similar vibes. But the reason it's a Dreamcast vibe for me is it's very colourful. It's very, very, very colourful. The combat is basically it's an online. You can play it single player, but it's online mainly, and you basically just it's a combination of Burnout MotorStorm. What other kind of random racing games can I throw in here? Burnout, MotorStorm, and I suppose first-person shooter style game, really. It's that kind of weird combination. I don't mean in terms of the fact it's a first-person shooter, but in terms of it's a deathmatch style game or team deathmatch style game. And just everything about it aesthetically is very, very Dreamcast-like. It feels very original at the time. It felt very much like something I hadn't done before. It really didn't catch on with the public. I mean, I remember very early on I was pretty much playing with the same people every game. But it's just a really cool game. I think the game's probably been delisted now on the store. But I would say anyone who can pick it up, if you haven't played it, the vibe's really good. I know we spoke on the podcast before about it, and whoever was on there with me had played it and disputed whether it was a great game or not. I went back to it relatively recently and played the single player, and it still feels incredibly fresh. It looks absolutely stunning in 4K as well. So yeah, for me, aesthetically, rather than Yakuza, which is very much sort of the style of game and the vibe, for me, ONRUSH is just aesthetically is the big one for me. It's very, very Dreamcast-like, and it's the kind of game which I would imagine would be a launch game if Sega ever released a new console.
Nice. Yeah, I've seen this one. And I think I played it a little bit when it first came out, because I have a feeling it was free on some service. Like I think it might have been PlayStation Plus or something. It was almost released as a game for free there at the time.
Well, I think it was free on Stadia, wasn't it, for a while?
Potentially, yeah. But I know I've played it, and I think it had physical versions, right? So even if you can't find it digitally now, you can probably find it physically still. But I'm guessing the servers for online play are probably long gone as well.
I don't think they're going. Again, it hasn't been a while. I didn't play online last time I tried it, so I'm not entirely sure. But as far as I'm aware, it is Series X compatible. Should be, or every Xbox One game is. Or did it come out on PS3 as well? It must have come out on PS3 as well.
Pretty sure it did.
PS4, sorry, not PS3.
Yeah,
losing track. Yeah, it's. I presume the servers are down, which does lose a part of the game. It was very, very much online focused, but the single player is still pretty good fun. I suppose it's like playing a game from the Dreamcast era, not necessarily having online capabilities. It's still fun to play. The AI is actually really good as well. It's got some really good. It doesn't sort of do unrealistic things like in some, combat-based racing games. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just a super fun game. I think every Dreamcast fan. It's the kind of game where you're surprised Sega didn't make it. It was made by the guys, like I said, who made MotorStorm when it was a Codemasters, and then Codemasters didn't publish it. Deep Silver published it, but it's the kind of game which you can imagine Sega doing. It's the kind of game which you can imagine Sega being crazy enough to try.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna. I'm looking now to see if I can pick it up for a decent price, because I feel like I owe this game another try, even though it's long dead in terms of online. I feel like I should give it another try.
I think I might have it physically somewhere, and then I do have the I downloaded it whenever it was on PS Plus or Games for Gold or whatever it was. I don't even remember, but yeah, and it seems like one that would be an awesome candidate if somebody was able to rig it to have multiplayer, like just LAN multiplayer, so you don't necessarily need to be online. Like that would be kind of a fun convention game where you can have a room full of. How many players per team is it? Does it support?
I think it's. I want to say it's 16, but I'm going to be cheeky and check online. It's a fair few, but you're right. That is actually the right vibe. It feels very much like when I was playing it. It felt very much like the first time I sort of experienced Doom on a LAN setup. It's that kind of experience. It would be fantastic in that sort of game. I think they tried to go for the esports angle a little bit as well, which didn't work out. It's too much a blending of different genres, but it's incredibly overlooked, and I think it's a real shame. It's 5 years old now. it's for me, it's better than Rocket League. I mean, I know everyone loves Rocket League, but I've never really got into that. This one for me, it feels a lot more like a late 90s extreme sports. I'll use that term again, sort of style game.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't get into this one when it came out, because I'm an absolutely huge fan of the MotorStorm games, especially MotorStorm Apocalypse. So, knowing that they made ONRUSH as well should have been for me straight away. And obviously it does have that, very similar vibes. So yeah, I'm going to have to go look into this now. But yeah, I think in terms of Dreamcast spirit, absolutely, I can totally see that as well. Knowing from what I know and from what I've seen, I think it's one for, again, if you can find it, if you're able to pick it up. I think the thing is with this whole list that we've done here is we've probably just given people a whole list of games that they need to go out and play now. We're talking about what games embody the Dreamcast spirit, but we're also looking at what amazing games are there that are kind of underrated. And again, as we mentioned before in this chat, it's that's also the vibe of the Dreamcast, right? It's underrated. It didn't do as well as it should have done, and a lot of these games, maybe not the Yakuza games, maybe not Bully so much, because I know that sold less than GTA, but it still sold okay. But they're all to a degree, an underdog of some kind. Blur came at the end of the line for Bizarre Creations. Every X and Extra Extreme did well, but nobody really remembers it now very much. You've got VR games which are just starting to come up, but it's still a fairly new thing. You've got Sunset Overdrive, which is maybe not something that many people have played, considering it was Xbox One exclusive. You've got you've got ONRUSH. There's all these things that are fantastic games that people should absolutely give a try, just like the Dreamcast. If you've never played a Dreamcast, everybody on here will obviously tell you, please go and play a Dreamcast. And obviously, if you're listening to this and you haven't played a Dreamcast, I'm not sure why you've got to episode 115 of the DreamPod without having one. But obviously, go and play it. But yeah, I think the underdog status is definitely come out in this podcast for sure. I think that's all the games that we've got for this time, but I mean, considering what we've talked about, there's potential for a part 2 maybe with some of the other people from the Dreamcast Junkyard, even with some different games. So, if you're interested in that, again, let us know, and maybe we will do a part 2 of this particular pod. But that leads us on pretty much to the end. There's kind of something that we wanted to address, and it's something that Tom addressed himself in his article about C-Smash VRS, which is a great article. And as we say every time that we do a podcast, please do go check out the blog. There's some fantastic articles on there by multiple members of the team. Some people who don't appear on the podcast, some people hopefully appear on podcasts down the road. We've got a couple of people who we're hoping who write for us who we're hoping to get on podcasts, which would be great. But obviously Tom started the Dreamcast Junkyard over 15, well gosh, when in fact it's 18 years at this point that he started it.
2005, right?
Yeah, 18 years ago, Tom started the Dreamcast Junkyard, and some of us here have been here for quite a while. Some of us are fairly new within the last few years. And there's people on the team overall who've been here for long, short. We've come and gone, but obviously Tom is the constant. There has been the constant up until this point, as he's mentioned in the. In his C-Smash VRS article, he is taking a step back. I think he's run his course with what he feels he can do. He's got other things that he wants to do, and I think he knows that he has a good team here now who will make sure that things carry on and that we still do the pod and any articles that we want to put up on the site. So yeah, he is taking a step back. I'm sure he will be back on for the occasional podcast. He may even write the occasional article here and there, but he won't be kind of the presence that he was up until this point in terms of being here for everything. But he started this all off. Without him, Dreamcast Junkyard wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be speaking to you all now. So thank you so much to Tom for steering the Dreamcast Junkyard up until this point. I think everybody who knows the Dreamcast Junkyard will likely know of Tom, will probably have met him at some point at an event, or spoken to him online or something like that. So I'm sure you all know what a great guy he is, and how much he loves the Dreamcast and the community overall, and what it's become in the recent years with all these indie games which he absolutely champions and loves. So yeah, just I guess a huge thank you to Tom. Obviously we will do our best to drag him back onto podcasts as and when we can, his time permitting, because we love to hear his voice and his opinions on things. But in the meantime, obviously you've got the rest of us here, and Lewis, who is obviously with us today, is going to be taking over the day-to-day running. We don't do things on a daily basis, but the day-to-day running of the Dreamcast Junkyard, and making sure that we continue to put out stuff that you guys all want to hear, and that interests you, making sure that we're still that place that you go to for Dreamcast news and weird Dreamcast podcasts about random topics. So yeah. So guys, goodbye to Tom. Thank you so much for everything you've done, and hi Lewis, our new overlord.
Hi, I've been here this whole time, but yeah, I just want to add, like in the past, obviously, if you listen to Tom talking about the Dreamcast Junkyard, especially if we reflect on kind of like the length of time it's existed, he's incredibly humble about it, and sometimes he jokes that he doesn't quite get like why it's such a big thing to people. But I think a great example is when I fucked up our Twitter account and it got locked. Everyone was kind of really sad about that. They were like, I think Wave described it as, we've lost a pillar in the community, and it's like, that's what it is. That's what the Junkyard is, and that's why all of us guys here, joined up and wanted to be part of it, because it is like that central hub for Dreamcast stuff, I guess. And there's other amazing sites out there as well, and communities that champion the Dreamcast as well. But like the Junkyard's been like, it's like old school, I suppose. Maybe not as old school as Dreamcast Source, but yeah.
It's not going anymore though, mind you.
But yeah, so yeah, like obviously Tom's kept it going for this many years, and like, that's incredible. So we hope we get him back at some point, but like obviously it's, I'm happy to take over the day-to-day and have him just shine where he needs to, with his articles, if he wants to write them when he wants to write them. So, yeah, thank you, Tom.
Absolutely. And again, I've been trying to get people who are listening to interact with us. I mean, I know that people do already, which is fantastic. So, if you have any memories of specific funny or interesting memories of Tom, articles that you really enjoyed of his, or moments on podcasts, or times that you've met him at events or something. I mean, it sounds like an obituary at this point. Tom is not dead. I will. Tom is still going. I talk to him all the time. But it's kind of nice to celebrate what he's done, and I think us showing him that as well would be pretty fun, to show him that people have really enjoyed the stuff that he's done, and might encourage him to do stuff with us still, and not just disappear entirely. So yeah, if you've got any of those memories, any particular funny times on the podcast that Tom's been involved in, or I mean, he loves to write his articles, and his humor and his wit in his articles is legendary. So any particular articles that you've really enjoyed of Tom's, kind of share on our Twitter in the in the comments below the post for this particular podcast. Or can people post on the actual podcast comments and stuff? I'm not sure.
You could leave us a review.
Which you should do as well. Please do leave us a review. It really does help. I don't think we mentioned that enough, actually. So for any podcast service that you happen to be using, that you're listening to us on, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Google, whatever service you use, please do leave us a review. It'd be really appreciated, especially if it's 5 stars.
Yeah.
In fact, if it's less than 5 stars, don't leave us a review. But yeah, that does bring us to the actual end, where I will plug our socials, and everybody here will plug their socials too. So, Lewis, do you want to start? Where can people find you outside of the Junkyard?
Yeah, so you can find me at LewisJFC on Twitter, and I run the Junkyard Twitter with Mike, which you'll plug in a second. And like, we enjoy posting Someone referred to it as shit posting. I think I think that's what it. Sometimes we get into that kind of territory.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I don't know if I've noticed it yet, but have you posted about the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Dreamcast Twitter account yet?
No, we haven't. Yeah, that's interesting. That embodies the Dreamcast spirit in a way.
Sega Gaga all again, isn't it?
Yeah,
in what it's doing.
Super like self-aware, right? Yeah.
Yeah, which is very cool. Depending when this podcast comes out, that might be like totally old news and old hat. But there you go.
Oh shit! I'm sorry, I just looked it up on Steam. It's actually like a real Sega game.
Yeah, they released it on April Fool's Day, right? So it's like people were like, "Ha ha ha, very funny," and it's like, no, it actually exists.
Yeah. Oh, it's the day before. They announced it yesterday because we're recording on April Fool's Day now. For those who are listening, but yeah, it came out yesterday. So yeah, it was just before, which is what. But people thought it was April Fool's still.
Yeah, this whole podcast was actually just an elaborate joke.
Yes, it was. Try and figure out that joke if you can. Brian, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on. I think I'm still on Twitter, although not as often. At Virtua Schlub. I think my screen name is Jet Brian Radio. I think that goes for Mastodon as well. And then we have a podcast on the Saturn Junkyard, which I'm also very occasionally involved with. But we do record podcasts from time to time called the Titancast. So that one is also on pod sites everywhere. I think the most recent episode that Cameron and I recorded, we basically rambled for like 2.5 hours about PSO2, nice. The new Genesis, and PSVR 2. So the PS blank 2 stuff. I think we had some Panzer Dragoon Saga talk in there too.
Yeah, just to keep it Saturn related in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't really worry too much about that, just because it's rare to get, because there's 4 of us who are regularly doing it, and it's rare to get us in get a time where we're all available at the same time, just because we're all in different parts of the world. So it's kind of challenging the schedule, and then the chances that we're all playing Saturn games at that time is also rare. So we just kind of have evolved that into a general chat about games or games influenced or in the mold of Sega. Kind of this episode, for example, like this is kind of an example of a lot of the stuff we might talk about. And then we'll try to do focused episodes that are about like a game club style or book club kind of thing about a specific Saturn game that we'll try to arrange well in advance and all try to coordinate our time to play. But yeah, it's pretty fast and loose with it. It's actually a fairly platform agnostic podcast for a Saturn cast.
Nice. Yeah, go give that a listen. And you still do writing on the Virtua?
Yeah, the virtuaplanet.com. I haven't posted anything in a while, but I have like 10 drafts of a bunch of stuff that as soon as the writer's block goes away, I'll probably be pumping those out fairly quickly. Maybe over the summer I might do a few. Nice.
Awesome. Mike, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at space_turnip. It's been a while since I've looked at my Twitter name, actually. To be fair, by the time the podcast's out, Twitter will be dead anyway. And also on Dreamcast Picks on Twitter as well, where I continue writing occasional posts about the updates to the A to Z guide, which is ramping up in getting towards the release. I've now got a bit of a team of editors. I've got 4 editors, which is interesting. Hello to Lawrence, Andrew, and Michael as well. And that should be out quite soon. There's some news about that coming relatively soon. And I occasionally am on there just talking absolute nonsense.
Nice. Very cool. And just to point out as well, that is Andrew Oyster, not me.
Yes,
he's awesome, and Mike rocks from the Discord. So please do go check out our Discord. But it's Lawrence as well, who's lovely, and who I met for the first time when we went to the Nottingham Video Games Festival. Was that the first time you met him as well, Lewis? Have you met him before?
That was the first time. Yeah, first time I met all of you actually.
Well, very true. Yeah. We need to do more of those.
Definitely. Yeah,
they're fun. But yes, you can find me over at Oddment84 on Twitter. And yeah, other than that, you can find me doing my thing over at Lost in Cult, which is lostincult.co.uk. So go check out that for lots of other video game type content. And I think that's it in terms of plugging ourselves. The only other thing to do is plug the thing that you're listening to right now. I've already mentioned it a little bit, but please go to the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk and check out all the amazing, wonderful articles and news and everything else that goes on there. Also visit the Twitter, which is at the DC Junkyard, which Lewis mentioned earlier, and that's where we'll post up-to-date news, memes, general shit posting, as Lewis said. So check that out. You can, of course, go to the Facebook group as well, which does still exist. I don't think we do a huge amount on there anymore, but we have people like John, who's an incredible part of the Dreamcast community. So if you're on Facebook still, I don't think many of us on the podcast are anymore, but if you are, pop over to there. That's still going on. There's 16,000 and plus people over on that group, which is great. We've got the Discord as well, which is kind of a bit more of where our community lies these days. You can find the link for that on the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. So please join us over on Discord. We'd love to have a chat with you and talk about Dreamcast, Sega, whatever you like. It's a really lovely community where people are very supportive. We're talking about new indie games all the time, people showing off their collections, kind of looking for various things, Dreamcast related. So it's wonderful. Go take a look. And if you like what we do and you want to support us a bit more, you can also buy us a coffee or actually a VMU battery, because that's more on brand. So you can go to buymeacoffee.com/DC Junkyard and you can just donate a little bit of money to us, which will go towards the upkeep of the site, server costs, podcast hosting, podcast recording costs, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, please do consider doing that. Every VMU battery helps to keep things going. But yeah, that is us. Go check us out on all those places, and obviously keep tuning in for more DreamPod episodes. We've got plenty more planned for the future. So yeah, keep on coming back, and we'll keep on giving you DreamPods. And as I say, interact with us as much as you can in terms of telling us what you like, telling us the games that you would have picked if you were on this particular episode as well. I mean, do that on Discord if you like, but do it on our Twitter and anywhere else you can. But yeah, if you do want to hear another episode, let us know. I think this is quite fun to go through those. And I'm going to go now find a bunch of games. I'm going to go find Umurangi Generation, Sunset Overdrive, and ONRUSH, and play the crap out of them. So if you do the same, let us know. And until next time, take care.
Keep
play some
dreaming?
Dreamcast.
Is that the one? Keep dreaming? Dream
Keep
on.
dreaming.
No, wait,
Yeah.
that already is a thing.
Probably, yeah.
In your dreams.
Keep thinking. No, that's not great. We need a new sign out thing. Yeah, we'll find one. Maybe suggest some. But yeah, see you later.
This is the Dreamcast disc. 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 And is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.